Hi, everyone. I'm Michaela Parker, founder and executive director for the Academic Data Science Alliance, and I'm here to welcome you to our Listen and Lunch webinar series, where we bring you experts from around our community to share their approaches to incorporating AI in teaching and research in higher education. So today, I'm delighted to invite two guest speakers. We're going to hear about enhancing cyber infrastructure to support advancements in AI at the University of Utah from Penny Atkins, and she will be interviewed today by Barney Maccabe. But before we get into the introductions of our speakers, I wanted to remind everyone that our event is guided by our code of conduct. You can find a link to our code of conduct in the footer. And then also, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Academic Data Science Alliance, we are a community of data science leaders, practitioners, and educators who believe in a just, equitable future where data science approaches are thoughtfully applied in all domains for the benefit of all. I just mentioned that code of conduct. It's linked in the footer of our website, and our website URL is on this slide with a QR code if you have your phone handy. And so you can also go to that website to learn more about our events, activities, and how to become a member of ADSA. Okay, so without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Penny and Barney. Penny Atkins is a director of research and science at the Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute and adjunct faculty in the Kahlert School of Computing at the University of Utah. In this role, she supports the University of Utah's $100 million 1U Responsible AI initiative. Penny completed her bachelor's in industrial engineering at Montana State University prior to working at the Idaho National Lab for 4 years. Penny then received her PhD in bioengineering from the University of Utah and completed a post-doctoral fellowship at ETH Zurich before returning to the University of Utah. Our interviewer today is Professor Arthur Barney Maccabe, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Computation and Data-Enabled Insight at the University of Arizona, or ICDI. ICDI seeks to cultivate the data and computing capabilities needed to address grand challenges. ICDI is committed to helping researchers expand the impact of their work, creating career opportunities for students, and consistent with the university's land grant mission, growing the economy throughout the state of Arizona. So welcome, Barney and Penny. Thank you for joining us today. And Barney, why don't you go ahead and take over now?
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, McKenna. So Penny, let's get started. And why don't you give us a brief overview of the program you all are building in Utah?
Perfect. Yes. Thanks, Barney, and thanks, Michaela. So here in Utah, we have our 1U Responsible AI initiative. As Michaela mentioned, it's a $100 million initiative. It was launched in late 2023 by our university president, really just with a hope of building our research expertise, building out cyber infrastructure, and then really developing the community and support structures that we need in order to advance that effort. And so a lot of what responsible AI means to us is really looking at how we can use AI for societal good. So applying it for things like air quality, mental health, things that are really pressing challenges, and especially challenges that we face locally here in Utah. So I think that's kind of a high level. We have a number of different programs that we have open to try to engage with our researchers and research expertise. I'm just going to highlight them quickly because I think they could be of interest to the ADSA community, but we have a distinguished visitors program. So that brings in faculty from other universities, industry professionals, folks who are currently in government, brings them into the University of Utah from anywhere from a week to a semester to really just integrate them with our researchers and faculty and understand how we can kind of work together and move forward. Another thing that we have is we will be launching cluster hires. We'll be doing some faculty hiring in the near future, so keep your eyes open for that. That will be very exciting. Our first two will be around the ideas of environmental sustainability and then how we rethink education for the future of AI. And then we'll have a health-focused one kind of coming in the future. But lots of exciting things. We also have a postdoc program, so that's a great way to bring in additional expertise. But beyond the research expertise, I think cyber infrastructure is a huge component of that. And I think that's what we'll be talking a little bit more about today. So I won't go into that much, but I think that's kind of high level what we're doing.
So I'm going to go off script a little bit because I do that. But I sort of wanted, so with all the uncertainty in federal funding and other things going on, are you all impacted by this? This is a state initiative and it's committed. And so how is that working out?
That's a great question. So our funding is entirely from the university, from university funds. So our funding is not affected at this current time. I think in this day and age, we don't want to speak too much for the future, but we don't foresee specific issues. I think Utah as a state is very proactive. We are working together with the state government and legislation to make sure that we have funding to advance technology, especially around AI. So I really don't foresee issues, but you never know.
Yeah. So you mentioned cyber infrastructure, and so a lot of this funding is to support faculty or people visiting and programs around and hiring. Let's talk a little bit about the cyber infrastructure component. Roughly, I mean, what kinds of percentages in terms of investment are going to physical hardware, to even human aspects of infrastructure and things around that?
That's a great question. So out of the 100 million, we are putting initially we have kind of 15 million that are focused on cyber infrastructure advancements within the next 5 years. So this is something that we kind of want to do gradually because technology is changing so rapidly. So we have that investment. I think we've invested nearly 5 million at this point, and we'll be continuing to build that out. And that is just for kind of your compute hardware storage aspect. In terms of people, we've also built out our cyber infrastructure support. I think that it's so critical in order for people to actually use the cyber infrastructure that you purchase to have those support structures. So we have been hiring a number of IT professionals, and then we're working on hiring some more folks to support research development, which will also kind of support that use of cyber infrastructure. So I think we are looking at 6 staff lines to support that over the next few years.
Okay, great. So how do you see this transforming the university in terms of education and research at the university? I mean, I presume $100 million is a pretty big number, right? And there's presumably some sort of a transformative aspect to the university.
Yeah, so the University of Utah, kind of underlying the overall mission of what our university is aiming to do is around societal impact. And so I think that is also the focus of this is to really just enable societal impact and also ensure that we kind of stay at the forefront of what's happening within AI. So I think in terms of what we'll see for transformation at the university itself is I think we'll see a lot more research expertise where faculty have the opportunities to really engage with students and teach them more about kind of what's going with our future. And as I mentioned, one of our cluster hires is really looking at how we rethink education for a future with AI in the workplace. And so I think that we will hopefully also help lead the transformation in how we're teaching students to approach the workforce. But I also think that through our investments in cyber infrastructure, we'll be making sure that every student has access to the compute that they need. The University of Utah supports both all of our students as well as students at Utah State University and universities across the state. So we really, through our investments, I think that we will impact students across the board and just ensuring that they have access to the appropriate both infrastructure and including within infrastructure, including the support that they need in order to access it and use the infrastructure.
So it sounds like you've got responsibility towards supporting research as well as instruction. Do you have any responsibility sort of in the operations of the university and using AI in how the university operates?
That's a great question. So Manish Parashar, who was supposed to be here today, I'm stepping in for him. He is actually our new chief AI officer at the University of Utah. So inherently, his role has kind of spread to also including more of the operational aspects. But our initiative is really research focused, research and education.
And so is it a balance between instruction and research, or is it mostly research with instruction being sort of secondary? Is that?
Yeah, our hope is that our focus on research will support advancements in instruction, but that's not a direct focus of it. I think that inherently it's included when we look at teaching and learning as a key component, but our focus is really on the research.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that's changing, right? With this, as we go into AI, the infrastructure for instruction and the infrastructure needed for research are essentially the same, right? They have, and so having that crossover or having that kind of a capability is kind of, it's hard to do one without doing the other, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, you mentioned this before, but let's go into a little bit more detail on sort of how do you see this benefiting more broadly the state of Utah, right? In terms of the population and and things you would be doing around that.
Yeah, I think our real goal through the investment is to build up our resources at the University of Utah, but with the entire goal that is building up our community across Utah. So one thing that we've been doing is working with industry partners. So actually our first big kind of gathering that we hosted was around industry partnerships. So bringing folks from industry, from government, from other academic institutions to come together and understand what issues people are facing and start that conversation and really build community. From that, we've launched 5 special interest groups that are led entirely by independent folks throughout our community who are really interested in engaging with us on that. So we have special interest groups on policy, infrastructure, workforce development, community engagement, best practices. So really just kind of the broad spread of what people are needing in order to approach the future of AI. And so I think with that, some of it is really enabling that communication and awareness across the state of Utah of kind of both what's happening. We were the first state to have an Office of AI policy, and I think that Utah, in terms of our legislators, are very interested in ensuring that we kind of have leadership in that AI space. But I don't know that that's something that all of Utah citizens are aware of. So I think part of what we're doing is building that awareness. We did a partnership with the libraries to really focus on community engagement across the board. But I think part of it is providing that growth of research expertise, growth of infrastructure that can enable investments at the state level, but also just opening the doors for conversation and awareness.
Do you have anything that's sort of a formal relationship with the state agencies, or do you connect with the state agencies in any way, sort of to work with them to understand how AI can improve their working in the state or the information they're using?
Yeah, so the Office of AI Policy is led by a professor that used to be at BYU, which is another university within Utah. But we do not have, I guess he is part of our consortium. So we have kind of a community consortium that we just launched last month. He has been a leading member of that and really driving force within that. And then I think the state of Utah within this Office of AI Policy, that's really their goal. And they're very engaged with the universities, including the University of Utah. We were part of initial conversations about a lot of the legislation that set up that office. But another thing that we have as a state, and this is a recent development, is with a MOU with NVIDIA that was signed by the state, as well as this Office of AI Policy, kind of economic development facilities within the state, as well as I think 6 different universities across Utah to enable workforce development. So I think there are starting to be some formal relationships, but Utah is so collaborative. I think that there's these things that it's just kind of expected that we're all working together for these things. But I'm looking forward to seeing how our consortium grows over the next few months to support that relationship more formally.
Thanks. So just a note to the audience, if you have a question, please drop it in the chat or raise your hand. I think we will see you if you raise your hand, but please, if you have a question for Penny or for me or for any of us that have, but mostly for Penny, let me know and we'll get that going. So as you start to deploy this infrastructure, what do you see as the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think for one, an easy answer is access to infrastructure if you're trying to purchase it. But then in terms of actually deploying, I think the biggest thing is making sure that people have the resources that they need in order to understand how to use the technology. So really setting up a community of practice. So we have an AI community of practice, which is one opportunity where people can come together and start asking questions about how to get use. But I think also setting up the training and support structures that are needed for people to access the cyber infrastructure and really get onboarded. I think at this point it's definitely not an easy process and not intuitive if you're not already someone who's computationally with your background and have access to, say, know how to use our Center for High Performance Computing, logging into a terminal and things like that. And so I think over the next few years, we'll see that process is easier, that people are able to kind of have that barrier of entry will be lowered. But I think one of the biggest things is always just making sure that people have the support structure. Data is obviously so critical if we're talking about anything with AI. And so I think access to data and data literacy, I think that there's so much data out there and people may not understand what data they're using, why they're using it. And so I think that there's a lot of education that's needed around both data literacy and AI literacy in order to enable that use. So yeah, I think we're also doing a lot of things with data in order to try to really have data more on like where you're moving data and computing together so that you can have easier access to data at the place that you're actually doing compute. Also making data more reusable. I think there's so much data out there that's hidden. We're doing a lot of efforts with working with all our libraries and research data librarians to try to enable data use, but I think there are so many different things that can impact access. And so part of that is understanding what people's barriers are and then addressing them.
I'm glad you moved to data as far as the infrastructure piece, so we can pull that thread a little bit more. I think, we've been building high performance computing centers for a while, right? So we sort of know how to manage access, that we know what the pain points are for getting people on. I think the big thing with AI is that certainly it's a much larger audience than we'd had in the past, where computational science was mostly around STEM disciplines, and AI is impacting everybody. So there's a little bit of a challenge in sort of bringing people into just the access pieces. But let's go to data a little bit more. And are you building out a large data infrastructure? And if so, or are you giving people pointers to where data is, right? And how are you ensuring that the data has quality, right? That it's free of bias in some sense, or that it's usable, or how well it's usable. What kinds of advice are you providing with data as you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's so much about context that impacts those questions of bias and various things. Like if you were to take raw data and try to compute it, we were recently working on some air quality data. I think Utah has some really interesting air quality data, both because we suffer with poor air quality, but also because we're like that has set up a really nice sensor grid network. And so looking at that data, when it comes, so we have like mobile sensors on electric buses that are collecting data at the sub-minute level. And then you have kind of stationary air monitors at various locations across the community as well. But trying to combine these data and understand that you may not know if a bus is parked inside of a vehicle or inside of a like garage and so there's so many different things that apply to how you're using data that you really both need to have kind of the ethical thought of what data you're using, why you're using it. If you were to look at air quality at a kind of at a lower scale level, you may impact insurance decisions or how people are able to access various resources. And so I think that there's a lot of ethics that go into that. And so a lot of what we're trying to do with our AI community of practice is also have those discussions around data. But in terms of data access, we also have a NAIR pilot called the National Data Platform. So this is a platform that's really open to getting access for various user data sets. Data sets are already released. So we're not storing data sets. We're not trying to move them and keep them all in a separate repository, but really using existing repositories, but providing access to that data through a single platform where people can understand what kind of data exists and how they might use it. I think there's a similar platform that Manish has been working on with some other folks around democratizing data. So looking at, say, what data is available locally at your state or for a specific area or topic. And so I think our approach around data has been to support our researchers here at the U to ensure that they have the resources they need to share their data appropriately, making sure that they have accurate metadata and that that is pretty high quality. But I think leveraging existing information that's in the repositories, hoping for quality. But I think some of data quality, you can rely on the repository or rely on the researcher that published it. But part of it is also just having that data literacy to understand what kind of data you're using and how it may have been processed or not have been processed and should have been.
So how do you, back to data a little bit more and pulling on it. So most people, I would say, with data, we're sort of in the state we were maybe 30 years ago with software, right? Where people would develop their own software only for their own use, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you start getting people to think about when they build data assets that they're building them for a community rather than just for getting the one result they need, right? And how shareable are some of the data, right? So some things may be so specific, they're just not particularly useful outside. How do you sort of work through that?
That's a great question. And I might turn that back to you after I answer because I'm curious what you would respond. But I think so much of that is ensuring that you have the support. I think part of that is ensuring that people have the support. But beyond that, if you're a researcher that's working on a specific data set, you may not know that the libraries at the University of Utah has, the services that are available to actually help you through that process. So that's not actually more effort for you, because I think a lot of people are worried that it's additional effort. And now with federal requirements to share data, I think that we are moving in the right direction, but it's going to be a slow process. And um, I think it's a lot around talking about it and making sure that people are aware of the potential of data sharing. And I think the NIH has a current S-index challenge, which is something that we've been talking about a lot for how do we share data and how do we acknowledge that. Currently, there's not a mechanism to acknowledge researchers who are doing great jobs at sharing data. And so part of it is awareness, and part of it is also increasing that acknowledgement that would help people be more aware and to hopefully share their data. But what are your responses?
I was going to say you gave the best one. I'm done. I like, no, I do think that that's sort of the issue is we've got to start thinking about this as we're building products, right? And products for a community and identify the community and start to think around that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have a question from the audience, and I'll pipe that one in sort of intellectual infrastructure, right? The human part of the infrastructure. We should go back and talk about that a little bit more. How are your staff, or how are you and people shepherding people along and creating career opportunities, right? Because one of the things for what we call research software engineers, research data engineers, cyber infrastructure professionals, is this sort of a new thing, right? That is much more of a campus-wide. There's some sort of an analogy to people, used to support in chemistry, right? To support benches in lab sciences there. But those were sort of departmental. These are much broader kinds of capabilities. And so what are you doing to sort of shepherd and make sure we have careers for people in those areas?
Yeah, that is such an important question, and I think comes back to so many of these things. If you can't use AI, you can't use cyber infrastructure if you don't know how. And so, in terms of current staff that we have, we don't have anyone that's specifically looking at like at the never before have I used it level for research. We do have an educational program that brings faculty along from, say, humanities or science, but maybe hadn't had access to AI or don't really find themselves to be a computational person. So we have a program through our School of Computing where they kind of bring in a few faculty members from across campus and teach them about AI and help them work through a project. So that's kind of how we're doing it at the research level. Operationally, we do have access. So we have like an office hours that happens every week where people can ask questions about, hey, how do I use AI for this project? And we say, whoa, maybe you should think about what data you're using and think about the ethics before you go forward with that. So I think we do have an access for operational, and we're starting to do it at the research level for faculty. But we also have a cyber infrastructure professionals co-op that's out of our Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute. So that provides some community and support for these individuals because they are so critical to what we do. We would love to have more of that, though. I think it's so critical. You see some of these bigger institutes with lots of support that can really shepherd folks throughout the process. I think we've been working with the libraries to see if that might be a better place for someone with that type of skill set as well. So we don't have it all done yet, but we have lots of pieces in the works, and we've had some really good successful projects. But finding formal infrastructure to support that, I think, is something that is still in process for us.
Excellent. So this is really, really exciting in terms of what you all are doing. So well, I'm sure we'll be keeping tabs on where you go. What do you see as sort of the biggest change in the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the hardware coming in? Where do you see that trend going? We've only got a couple minutes, so keep your
Yeah,
thoughts.
I think the thing I think we're going to see more and more of is putting compute and data closer to each other, and I think balancing that with the use of cloud computing. I think that there will be a balance between local and cloud, and I'm not sure exactly how we'll see that play out over the next while, but I think that that's definitely something that we need to be able to support. And I think as universities, part of what we are here to do is to kind of innovate and see where that will go. We're not going to have the largest GPU clusters in comparison to the big corporations, but I think that we may be able to kind of innovate and help advance the entire community and how we're thinking about infrastructure.
And yeah, the half hour goes very fast. So we're already over time. Thank you so much, Penny and Barney.
Penny,
That was
thanks
a
so
great
much.
conversation.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
We did not miss him. You did a fantastic job. We really enjoyed the conversation. Take care.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.